Now, we're going to start off a little bit differently today because we have two fantastic guests who are people that I consider to be among the education glitterati. These are rock star educators doing great work in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And just a wonderful illustration, that's why we asked them to join us, of the real power that comes from the collaboration that in my opinion, must exist between a state board and the state commissioner, the state superintendent, or what have you. And we all know there are different variations on these themes, right? If I'm remembering Kentucky correctly, the commissioner is actually appointed by the board. So that creates a very logical bond. In some states, the commissioner may be appointed by the governor, may be elected, and that creates a sort of a different dynamic. But the bottom line is, regardless of the configuration, there is value in that relationship and importance in what that relationship looks like, because a state will always be stronger if people are on the same page. That also includes the legislature and the governor and what have you. Today, we're just going to focus on that relationship between the board and the commissioner. And so I'm just delighted to have Jason Glass, who's the commissioner of the Department of Education in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and Lou Young, who chairs the Board of Education in Kentucky. I can go on. They both have long histories in education. Both of them started as teachers. Both of them advanced through different administrative functions. Jason was also at one time the commissioner in Iowa, I believe. Also served as a district superintendent in a couple places in Colorado. Lou had a long history at one particular district, rising from a teacher to ultimately becoming the superintendent in that district. And now she's on faculty at the University of Kentucky in their School of Education, which is another fascinating topic. At some point, we will invite her to do a webinar for us about, that higher ed, K-12 collaboration. That's a great topic, and she'd love us to talk about that. But today, we're going to talk about partnerships. So maybe what I'll do is start by asking you each to comment on your point of view about the importance of the relationship between the board and the state commissioner. Lou, why don't you go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I really appreciate that you preface the comments, Paolo, around a partnership. I really do believe that's what Jason and I have established over our time together in the last couple of years. It's a relationship that I value immensely. I had the great fortune of being on the board that hired Jason. And so that's one of the things to think about too. We were looking for the person that we hired, absolutely. And we were able to conduct an extensive search, had amazing candidates, but it was really clear that Dr. Glass was the right commissioner for Kentucky at the right time. And we were specifically looking for a lot of things that are in his DNA. In a post No Child Left Behind world, he has a penchant for innovation. He is incredibly student-centered. So I'm the president of his fan club. I won't make any bones about that from the start. But what has happened over time, we spent some upfront time together talking about how we might best work together. And he was extremely collegial in that approach and really open to it. Having been a superintendent myself, I have worked with boards, and I made a commitment as a new board member and a brand new board chair that I was going to be the kind of board member for Jason that I wanted when I was in that leadership role.
Great. And we'll get into what kind of board member that is. Jason, why don't you reflect on the fundamental question? How important is that relationship?
Well, I appreciate being on with you, Paolo, and also appreciate being on with Lou. We're in each other's mutual fan club, so I'm a big Lou Young fan too, and she helps me tremendously around the state. Just the respect and admiration that she has with district leaders and school board members around the state. Lou is a known quantity in Kentucky, and so when I talk about Lou Young said this or Lou Young thinks this, it has meaning here. So she's a policy force in our state and a delight to work with. I tell people that this is a golden era board that I have right now. They don't always last, and boards are always changing with new members, but we really have incredible, passionate educators and people that believe in public education on the board that want better schools for the state of Kentucky. So we're all pulling in the same direction, and that's really important. And I've had the opportunity, as you mentioned, to work as a state chief in Iowa. I had a state board there. I was a gubernatorial appointee there, so the dynamic was a little different, but we all worked very closely together as well. And then I was the superintendent in 2 districts in Colorado. I had numerous board members through that. So this is, I guess, technically the 4th board that I've had the opportunity to work with. And so I've seen the range of how it can be really good and really bad. And I know that this is a golden era right now.
Great. So I want to build on Lou's comment about, what are the elements of a good relationship? What do you want from a board member that's going to be, a supportive and a strong partner? I'll start with you, Jason, and then Lou, I'll ask you to reflect on that as well.
I think it's most important, and Lou talked about this early on when she said she had been a superintendent and wanted to be the kind of board member that she would have wanted as a superintendent. It's important that the board and the state chief understand their role or their lanes. So we have different jobs. And things work best when we're in our own lane, but occasionally we veer into the other. And so I think it's kind of like 2 airplanes flying side by side. When one shifts over, the other better know, and there better be some communication back and forth as you make those shifts. So generally, I work on the operation of the organization side. I run the Department of Education. I wade into policy matters. I oversee the enforcement of state statute, regulation, and sometimes federal law as well. And so that's my lane. Those are the things that I work on. The board really is my boss, and they set higher policy priorities for the state. They give me parameters, direction, advice, and that's the role that they're in. Occasionally they will veer into my world, and occasionally I will veer into theirs, but it works best when I think there's clear communication that we're about to veer into each other's orbits here, and we need to be paying attention, understand why that's happening, what the purpose of that is, and then understand that there's a time that needs to end as well for it to remain functional.
Great. Well, and we'll get into that a little bit. Lou, do you want to reflect on the same question? What are the attributes of a strong board member commissioner relationship, including what do you expect from the commissioner in terms of how he interacts with you?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And I really appreciate Jason's response too, in that we have, in a system, lanes are really important, but they're still part of the same system. So this notion that we do ebb and weave and dodge and all of that is really important. So from the member perspective, I think the communication about what the role is, and then we've also tried to foster a board culture where if you don't know, ask. And I really do believe in that kind of importance of the role, that my job is to listen to the board members and then translate or directly take the message to Jason and his team. So we've put structures in place that we'll talk about that allows us to do that. But I also don't want people to think that this lane notion is constricting. It's really about clarity. And there are times when Jason has texted me and said, do you have time for a call? And we've said to each other, we're going to get out of our lane on this one. It's an upfront proposition. There are times when, having some flexibility in the role is really important as well.
Alan, if I might add on to that just briefly, one of the advantages that we have on this board is the incredible expertise that we have on it, including Lou. But really, if you look at the backgrounds and resumes of everybody that's on the state board in Kentucky, there is an incredible wealth of knowledge that we have. So one of the things that I've consciously tried to do as a state chief is use that. And so often times thorny, difficult questions that I'm running into, I'll reach out to Lou or reach out to other board members who have expertise in that and say, what do you think? Help advise me. So they really have been a great source of wisdom and knowledge for me as well.
Fantastic. So here you are sitting with a group of new board members. That's what our New Member Institute is all about. They're coming on. They understand a little bit of the lay of the land. One of the slides I used in our first session was like all the players in the great big education policy arena. What advice would you give them in terms of building a relationship with the commissioner in their state, and how might they go about that? Lou, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. I thought about that when I was looking at some of the possible questions, and I don't have a lot of wisdom here except to say, be kind, be good people. One of the things that Jason and I often talk about is presuming good intent, and that is with our members of our General Assembly, with members of the public at large, and certainly with one another. So developing a collegial relationship. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we have really difficult conversations, and then striking that balance between the collegiality and then the responsibility to hold one another accountable for the important work. So it is nuanced, as you mentioned earlier, Paolo, but it gets the better the communication, the better the intent, the commitment to serve. All of those things begin to develop a board culture that I think is really healthy. And we have not done this yet, but are going to be moving in the direction, hopefully at the October meeting, where we begin to assess ourselves as a board and how we're doing against some of these really clear precepts that we have all committed to. So I think, again, individual accountability, organizational accountability, and then cross-team accountability is really important in the conversation as well.
Great, great. Jason, when you have a new member, I think you might have a new member in Kentucky. What do you look for in terms of building a relationship?
Well, just building on some of the things that Lou said around that mutual accountability and respect, I would add to that. I think it functions best when there is an understanding of the human being that you're across the table from and working with. I think one of the strengths that Lou and I have, and that really the whole board has, is that we all really genuinely like each other. At least I like them. I'll say that. I don't know how they feel about me, but I really like them as people. And we've invested time in building those connections and relationships, getting to know each other, so that when something happens in our professional or personal lives that impacts our respective work, we can support each other through that and understand that we're human beings, make mistakes, and we can support each other through those as well. And so in addition to all the things I think Lou talked about with trust and accountability, there's a human element to this that I've found, not just with this board, but with every great board relationship I've had. There was an understanding, respect, and deep care for each other as humans.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important because it helps you uncover where they're coming from, right? Somebody's a farmer, somebody's a banker, somebody, went to a public school in one of your major urban areas, something like that. It gives you that context that they bring to the table among their different identities. And you only get to know that through building a relationship, having a conversation, having a cup of coffee, getting to know each other better.
Yeah, and you have to invest an effort in making that happen. So that doesn't happen when it's 8:31 a.m. and the clock starts and the cameras come on and you're on Robert's rules. Like, you don't do that during those times. You need to find ways to invest and build those kinds of personal relationships. Really get to know each other. What people's backgrounds and experiences. What were the things that shaped them? What do they bring into the table, and who do they bring into the room when they make decisions? Those are important questions for me to know and for the board to know about me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So say a little bit about some of the processes. I mean, Jason, you're at board meetings. What does that look like? You talked a little bit about a board retreat recently. How does that help, facilitate and build that connective tissue? Lou, I'll start with you.
Sure. We've just recently changed the format of our board meetings from one day every other month to 2 half days. And the intent there was the intentionality that Jason was just talking about, so that we would have evenings after the first day together to relax, put on casual clothes, sit around a table together and not talk business. Of course, we're careful about the rules, but to build those relationships. So that's just one example. And we had always had a 2-day retreat in August and 2 days in October when we evaluate the commissioner. And so expanding that format some, I think, will actually build into that. We have some things I think are also really good structures that you might think of if your board is not already doing this. Jason and I and our vice chair, Dr. Sharon Robinson, meet every other Friday in the middle of the day. We encroach on his lunch, and he, fortunately, I adore the fact that he will get steps in and drink some water while we're having our conversation. And we appreciate that wellness effort on his part. And then we just touch base on anybody has any running items. It has helped us develop a leadership team and a shared perspective about the work. And he brings in individual members of his team from time to time to tackle issues that our leadership group needs to be thinking about. And then we also do a larger rehearsal call before each regularly scheduled meeting with Dr. Glass and his full team, so that they can actually go in depth into the agenda items with committee chairs and the board leadership team, so that we can really, that gives me a chance to think about those individual board members and what additional information they might need to know to make good decisions. So I do feel like one of my roles is to shepherd the learning needs of individual board members. And I've got a sense now, after we've been together a couple of years, who might be more interested in which items and who might need more background on which items, which I think helps Jason and our policy advisor and board team customize and personalize for the board members, which I think has been really helpful. So those are just a couple of structures that come to mind. I actually had COVID during the retreat. I was watching from my bedroom for the first day of the retreat, but Jason handled it like everything. It was easy. And then I was able to join them for the second day of the retreat, but a lot of great learning went on the day I was sick.
Excellent. Excellent. Jason, you want to go ahead and weigh in on this one too?
Sure. Yeah.
And,
I think we have in all of the structures that Lou mentioned really work well for us, and they have been things that we've developed and adapted over time. But I think for every board and every state chief, the thinking through what's the rhythm of your meetings and the preparation that leads up to that. How do things get on the agenda? What's the communication like between the state chief and the board chair and vice chair? What does the communication look like with the rest of the board? How are they brought in and brought up to speed? What's the frequency of communication and how that happens? Those are really important to establish. And then also, I think, important to revisit on a regular basis. So here coming up during my evaluation this fall, one of the things that we'll talk about is reflecting on this past year. How has this experience of a board member been? Are you getting enough information? Are you getting too much information? Have we found the Goldilocks spot where this is just about right? Lou mentioned the change in some of the structure because we really wanted to have that time for the social human connections, but also we deal with a lot of significant policy issues. And so when we were trying to cram all those into 8 straight hours where you're on camera and under Robert's rules, we really were exhausting people by the end of it. The things that were toward the end of the agenda were not getting the freshness and the attention that they really deserve. So one of the shifts we made was around that structure to try to keep people fresh, engaged, paying attention, working hard throughout the whole meeting. So those are some adaptations that I think we've made, but I think every board's got to think about what's the communication structure and what's the rhythm of preparation for board meetings and how does that work for them.
Yeah, and it's okay for that to emerge organically for each board to figure out, what do we need, what helps us, what's overkill, and so forth and so on.
Right.
So
we also have, I'll just add that we also have really pushed on our staff at the department. One of the things that we noticed was that we were subjecting the board to a lot of death by PowerPoint. We would have presentations and the staff person would have 30 minutes and they would use 29 of the 30 minutes with bullet points on the PowerPoint and just wear the board out. And again, we have a board with incredible expertise. Yeah. And so what we've said is if you're going to just present information to the board, you send that to them ahead of time, and then you have a maximum of 15 minutes of presentation. If you go beyond that, it needs to be an interaction with the board where you're getting some information, some feedback or some guidance from them to again, tap into that expertise, but also to model the kinds of shifts in learning that we want to see happen in our schools. Lou has been a champion for deeper learning and trying to bring about meaningful learning experiences for students. But when we model as adults sitting and just being hammered with information, this is not the kinds of experience that our kids need. So we've taken it upon ourselves to really try and model the learning experiences for adults that we also hope to see happen in our schools.
Right, right. And I suppose if you have a board member that wants to dive deeper, they can always do that as part of their own, understanding raising or awareness raising with staff beforehand or outside the meeting. If they want to get a little bit, or maybe they're not that familiar with a particular topic area, they can always reach out.
And that's reaching out, getting information outside the board meeting, and then the process of deciding what's on the agenda. If the board wants to go deep into a topic, spend a couple of hours on it, then we just need to know that and plan for it, and then have available for the board any outside expertise they need, provide for them any resources or information, and count on them to have read and prepared for that, and then structure and facilitate the experience with the board so that they can go deeper if they want to. But it really depends on, is this an individual board member that's wanting specific information on something? If that's the case, I can assign staff or reach out myself to make sure that they've got what they need. Or if it's something that the whole board wants to go more deeply into, then we structure and build that into the agenda.
Excellent, excellent. Now I want to cross over into, okay, from time to time, something comes up. You may not share the same perspective, or how do you resolve differences? Or maybe you can even give us an example of a time where, hey, there might have been differences of perspective, and this is what your relationship allowed you to do.
Well, I can think of a couple of instances, not really when Jason and I have been very far apart in our perception on things, but I do remember one time that he called and said, okay, I might have just blown it. And I said, oh, great, what'd you do? And he, of course, hadn't blown it, but the whole purpose of the call was that he wanted to let me know that this, could make the paper. And so that kind of agreement that we have not to surprise each other is really helpful. In the course of that, though, I really appreciate the genuineness that he brings to the role, because he was able to say, any advice about how I could have handled that differently, I'm really open to. So that's the way. I think if we really did have a serious difference of opinion, or we're experiencing significant conflict, that the two of us have developed the relationship over time that says, we're going to move toward the danger. We're going to have the conversation. We're going to lay it all out, because if we can get it straight, then it's likely we'll be able to lead the board much more smoothly through difficult waters. And how turbulent times have been in the last couple of years. And so many times through the masking controversies, we had impromptu calls just to talk through particularly difficult interim joint committee meeting, for example. And so I really do appreciate his patience to invest in me and our board team on things that we need to do, but also his vulnerability and openness to accepting that kind of feedback. Knowing that's how we work together, I say bring on the conflict. I feel certain that we'll be able to work through it.
Lou is very, very gracious. We've had lots of tough issues over the past 2 years, as has everybody. Everybody who's been working in education has dealt with really difficult issues over the past 2 years. I think when it comes to the state chief's role, the state chief has sort of three hats that you have to wear simultaneously. One is you're the chief executive of the organization. So all the human resource decisions, the facility decisions, the salary decisions, all of that stuff that comes with running the state agency. And here in Kentucky, by extension, 53 of the technology centers and career centers across the state, I make those. And I'm the superintendent for the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. So there's a bunch of operational decisions that I need to make on a day-to-day basis. That's one hat I wear. Another is that I am an enforcer of regulation and statute. So sometimes I need to reach out to districts and say, I need you to change this behavior or way you're approaching this problem in your community to come in line with statute and get that straightened out. And I also weigh in on policy questions. When the legislature is considering something, or the media wants to know what is the position of the department and the commissioner on that, they reach out and ask for a statement on that. So I take on all of those roles on a daily basis. The board's role is really around setting the high level goals for me as the department and what their values are, and making sure that we're working toward that. They have regulatory authority, so they can establish regulations. And they have authority when it comes to things like standard setting and assessments and accountability systems that come from the federal government. I think we run into problems when we are not exercising our authority fully. So we leave a vacuum. There's some policy question that needs to be answered, and either the board or the state chief we haven't done our job. And so we leave it unresolved. That creates a problem. Or we overextend ourselves. We don't really have this power or this authority, but we've stepped into it as if we did. And then as soon as somebody challenges on you, you have to track back, but you leave a lot of chaos in the wake of that. So I think understanding the roles of the state chief and understanding both the limits of your authority and the responsibility that comes with that authority are important. When it comes to these, as I mentioned before, we're human. Everybody makes mistakes. I make them. My wife would say daily mistakes that I make. But it's important that we all be reflective. That we own that we think about how could I have handled that better? How could I have improved on that? And that's a process that we all need to go through as human beings, but especially in our role as leaders, if it's the state chief or members of the state board, that process of reflection and thinking about how can I be a better board member? How could I have treated that person better? How could I have handled this situation better? Those are all opportunities for learning that we can use throughout our life.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very safe climate where you can give each other honest feedback, in the spirit of continuous improvement and what have you. I'm going to see if anybody, is there anybody that has a question they'd like to ask Lou and Jason? We're going to wrap up here in just a couple of minutes because they both have other obligations. But I thought if anybody, after hearing this very enlightening presentation or discussion, had a question they wanted to pose, just chime right in.
I see Lauren has a question.
Great, Lauren. What's your question? You're muted.
There you go.
Hi,
thank you very much for your comments. I have two questions. First of all is, in terms of making decisions, in particular, sort of data-driven decisions, research-based decisions. One of the things that I'm interested in from a Hawaii perspective is we don't have actually we don't actually have our own research staff. So when we need information or we need to know what the research and the data say, we ask the Department of Education for that. And to some extent, that's great because they have the knowledge, but to some extent, just to be blunt, that's not an unbiased source because they are recommending a position to us and we're asking them for the context and the data to know whether that is backed by research. We can't actually tap the University of Hawaii to give us, the data that might be giving us the pros and cons for the decision we're being asked to make. So I'd be interested, my first question is, how do you in Kentucky, address that? For example, in particular, how does the board, all of whom I assume has other responsibilities besides going out and trying to be your own researcher, how does the board deal with that question? And my second question is related to the Sunshine Law. We have strict provisions under our Sunshine Law. So when you're talking about things like socializing afterwards, essentially the interpretations here are we can't have more than 2 board members in the same place practically under most circumstances. And so as a new board member, based on the way I've done things in previous lives and boards, that's really hard to form those kinds of relationships. So can you talk a little bit about how Sunshine Law applies to you and how you have managed legally to do things like have retreat sessions, which we can't do unless the governor convenes us. And we can't have the things I would normally do, a little picnic somewhere to get to know each other.
Great.
Thank you.
I'll take a
Why don't
quick
you start
stab
with
at
the data? Why don't you start with the
Sure.
data question? Because I think that's the more interesting. The second one really has to do with the variations among states and their legal interpretations. Go ahead, Lou.
Sure. We actually have an amazing research arm at the state level in Kentucky called KY Stats. And we use them a lot. They really are amazing. Our P20 students have a unique student identifier, and we're able to harness an amazing amount of data through a data sharing agreement that essentially make it our mined from KY Stats. And so if I needed something that was not readily available from KY Stats, I could put in a request through the commissioner in his office to KY Stats for those data. Jason has mentioned.
And so that's a separate agency of Kentucky government, you're saying? Is that okay?
It is, yeah, but available to us at no cost generally. If we were to ask for something Herculean, it might be a different story. I'm not sure. But we also have an amazing policy advisor. Now, she is an employee of the Department of Education, but she works exclusively with our board, and she is a PhD student in ed leadership and policy, and she works across the policy advisor ranks at the department. So if we need data about the teacher workforce, and it might be even more discrete data, we can go to Meredith, and over the course of a week or so, she will pull together an amazing policy report and then ask the question, what else would you like to know? She reports directly to Jason. She and I are in touch several times a week, and because of the rank of policy advisors across the agency and the fact that Jason has basically said, marshal your resources in support of the board, we actually have a pretty easy time with that, Lauren. Jason mentioned our expertise. The only person who's not been P12 experience on our board was the retired president of the University of Kentucky. So there's a lot of expertise across our team. And sometimes we really do just go out and research things on our own and bring that back to the conversation as well.
Jason, any comments on the data issue?
Sure. I think Lou summed it up well. When we get a question, Lauren, from the board about a policy issue, we can work with KY Stats or the researchers that we have at the department to pull together a research brief that lays out, here's what we know on that. When it comes to the specific question of a recommendation, so sometimes research questions are just the board is curious about something, and so we can pull together, here's what the research says around this topic, here you go for your information. We usually can send that out in a weekly update that we email to all the boards, all the board members. If it's something that's related to a specific issue, we can do the research, and then I always feel like it's my responsibility to give the board a recommendation on here's what I think you should do. But I also am, this is one of those lane issues. While I feel like it's my responsibility to give the board a recommendation, I feel that's what you pay me for, is to recommend, here's what I think you should do. I also understand that oftentimes the decisions that the board makes are hard decisions, and frequently you don't have a good option. You've got a lot of really difficult choices you have to choose from. And so among the difficult options, here's what I recommend, here's the rationale for that. And then at the same time, I am respectful that the board may go against that recommendation, and that's their power and their prerogative. And so understanding that, I think, is critical at when your state chief makes a recommendation to you, that they also present the messiness that came with that, and they're deferential to the board on making the ultimate call. On the question of the sunshine laws, it'll be different from state to state, as Paolo said. But when I was a superintendent in Colorado, we had those kinds of same strict rules around the board meeting together. And so what I did with them is I would take them out to lunch 2 at a time, because we could have 2 of them together, and I would mix up who we went out to lunch with. And I encouraged them to go out to lunch together 2 at a time, so that they could have those kinds of conversations and get to know each other. We also have an ethics briefing annually from the general counsel that we have at the attorney, just to make sure that we're clear on what can and can't be said in those kinds of social situations. But I think with some effort and creativity, you can create those kinds of interactions. Now, I understand that it's maybe more difficult in a state where you have to take an airplane to get from one island to the next to have lunch. But I again think with some creativity, you could find ways to develop those relationships together.
And Lauren, we travel with our board attorney. So whenever we break and recess, the language in the agenda always says, at this time, the board will be on a break. Anytime that a quorum is present, no board business will be discussed. And we stick by that. We are careful to honor that because we don't want to lose that opportunity.
Yeah, and just to tag on real quickly, the point that Lou made in the chat is very important, and I would advocate this, make this a rule with your board. When one board member asks a question, the entire board gets the response, both the question and the response. It's just really important that the state chief is transparent with the whole board so that you don't have factions forming, people who have different information than others. Everybody needs to see the questions that are being asked and the responses that are being given.
Great. Please join me in thanking these two outstanding public servants for their great work, and they're taking the time out of their schedules to be with us. Lou, Jason, thanks so much. Keep up the great work you're doing in Kentucky.
Thank you,
Thanks so
Thanks, Lou.
much. Have a great rest of the day. Bye, Jason.
Great. So what we're going to do is kind of go back to the top of the order. I'm going to turn it over to Janet Cannon, the board chair, just to provide a little bit of welcoming remarks, and then I'll introduce the other members of the board, and then we'll transition into our discussion about the federal landscape, which is the next major component of today's session. Janet, take it away.
Oh, well, I'll take this opportunity to say a few words of welcome and tell you how very much we appreciate your putting in the time to be here to do some professional development that will help you tremendously in serving on your State Board of Education. I think Lou and Jason just gave us some very hands-on, wonderful information about serving on a board and working with your state superintendent and working with fellow board members, because ultimately that's what makes a difference between a great board and a non-functioning board. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that each of you are here, and thank you for the opportunity, Paolo.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. I also see, just by way of introduction, Christine Benson, who is our chair-elect from Illinois, Woody Exley, who is the area director for the Northeastern states from Connecticut, Fern Desjardins from Maine, who is the secretary-treasurer for NASBE and also serves as the chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. I see Sarah Moore, who is the area director for the
South.
the South.
Arkansas.
Let's see. And those are the key. From here on, we're now going to turn it over for a little discussion about the current federal landscape. And how NASBE kind of interacts in that space. And we have a wonderful counselor in Reg Leichty, who is with Foresight and Law, who helps kind of guide us in that work, along with the Government Affairs Committee, which Woody chairs. And really is the focal point for that work. And then we're going to, we also have invited the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education, Cindy Marten, to chat with us. She's been gracious to find 15 minutes in her absolutely crazy schedule to just provide some introductory remarks about the U.S. Department. There won't be any time for questions. She'll be really on a tight. So we'll go to her whenever she gets here so that we can be respectful of her time. And then the other thing we need to, then we'll have our own Renee Lang give us an overview of a series of communications issues and some things that we feel like and have found over the years that new board members really need to know about communications and what have you. And then at the very end, we will have our election of the new member representative to the board of directors. You should have received the short sort of biography provided by Ken Karaya from Hawaii. He was the only individual that expressed interest in the role. And so we will we'll proceed along with that activity further in the agenda. So I'm looking at my staff to see if I have forgotten anything. Oh, the other thing that we're going to do is we want to make sure we get a picture of everybody, sort of a class photo. When we used to do these face-to-face, we would do that, you know, everybody would line up and what have you. But we try to do it virtually. So there'll be a point, I think we're going to try like after the break to, you know, quickly have people turn their cameras on and let us do a class photo at that point. But we'll alert you to that when we get to that point. So are there any questions while we're at this point of the agenda before I turn it over to Reg and whomever? I think Abby might chime in with some of the federal work because she leads that work for NASB staff. Any questions or comments anybody wants to make? If not, then Reg, the floor is yours. And I think you've got some slides maybe that you're going to share, or?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Paul. Let me bring those up now. And I'll just say, as I'm doing this, good afternoon and good morning to some of you. Thanks for having me on. We have, kind of a lot to cover in this 30 minutes, and really appreciate this opportunity to not only talk to you about what's happening in Washington, but I think what we've found in recent years is that it's also really valuable, at least for some new state board members, to think a little bit about what the role of the federal government is in education policy. And I've kind of wanted to just put a twist on that a little bit this year because we've always framed it as what's the federal role in education, but I also want to say what's the role of a state leader in federal policy making, and that may not seem immediately intuitive, but we'll get into it a little bit and see if this might provide some insight for you as you are beginning your work. I'm gonna just break this into three big buckets. I think first, kind of exploring the question of why should state board members understand and engage in at the federal level. Some of you may be very experienced in working with your congressional delegations, or might be in your professional context, might be in the role of a state leader now, but we want to kind of start there to really frame why NASB does this work and why it's so important for it to be done well. And as I said, I want to then turn a little bit to just exploring quickly kind of what the role is of the federal government in education policy, because I think as you exercise your authority as a state leader, you really have to be cognizant of the federal laws that your agency is obligated to implement, but also just thinking about some of the hurdles and opportunities that federal law creates for your work at the state level. And then lastly, kind of turn to what's happening now as we head into the last quarter of 2022 and looking into 2023, which frankly at this point is a lot more important, kind of what's happening in Washington, what's on the horizon you should know about. So first, on this idea of why as a very busy state board member should I dedicate some mind share to what's happening in Washington, DC. First and obvious point is that federal policies impact nearly every aspect of your state board's responsibilities. And those policies can really help or hinder your work. And that might be work in something around state and accountability and assessment strategies. It might be about teacher licensure. It might be, about mental health or, post-pandemic learning recovery. There are federal policies that are touching that work, right? And you want to understand them. And as we'll get to in a little bit, I think you want to really have a voice in what those are over time. Second, this depending on who you talk to, might be kind of a controversial idea, but I firmly believe it. State education agencies, they are an extension in a way of the federal government. And what I mean by that is, of course, they are independent, even often constitutional agencies in your states, but as it regards really important issues of educational equity and other, federal initiatives, it's the state agency that is operationalizing, that is the arm of the federal government, and bringing that policy to your schools and school districts. And again, it's I think a perspective you have to, as a state board member, really understand so that you're using as much as possible the federal policy set to further your, your local goals. Lastly, state board leaders' perspectives are unique, credible, and influential. What I mean by that is within the education system, you sit in a role that does not really have kind of a corollary at the local level. It doesn't have any kind of, corollary at the federal level. You are uniquely positioned to share insights inherent to the position of being a state board member. I think you come to the table when you're talking to policymakers in Congress in a really credible way, because you have been elected or appointed to serve an important federal or state role. And there's a certain amount of credibility that comes with that you bring to the table. You might be used, might not be used well. You could squander that credibility obviously quickly, but you come to the table as someone who federal policymakers believe they should, take seriously. And I think that's important. Lastly, you can have a lot of influence, right? So might not always seem like this is the case, but federal leaders really do look to state and local perspectives to, inform the decisions they're making. So, again, on top of everything else you're doing, I think you can, at those important kind of moments of federal focus on education policy, really bring to bear some unique and important insights to federal leaders. So that's the first part of this. So why does NASBE do this, and why should you? If you are new to your role or more, generally new to education, you might understand that the federal government invests in education, invests in our schools, but you might not think, or have thought a lot about what the federal role is. Looking back right to the 1960s when the federal role grew pretty substantially in local education matters, right? It started as, and I think today is predominantly about promoting access to educational opportunities, right? So the federal investment is about promoting equitable access to learning. Of course, looking back half a century, that started as an effort to try to equalize funding across our lower income communities. It's evolved a lot, and right, the sort of tentacles of the federal government have spread in a lot of different directions. But at the end of the day, it's really about promoting access to a high quality education. And for our purposes, as we talk to you as K-12 leaders, that's primarily through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This is the federal law that authorizes the actually the largest federal investment in our local schools through the Title I program, and then the obligations that go along with that on the policy side that are the subject of a lot of really important state board decision making around the types of assessments you use, how you operationalize the federal and state accountability requirements you have, standards, educator preparation, professional development, and a number of other areas. But also, kind of looking at other higher need student populations. So the federal government also provides significant funding, but also a huge number of obligations on schools through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Again, you see the equity focus. It's about providing what the law calls a free and appropriate public education to students identified for special education services. This is the second biggest federal investment in education through the IDEA state grants program, Part B of IDEA. That flows through your state agency. And then looking into higher ed, right? The Higher Education Act is, again, an equity focused law that's primarily authorizing federal financial aid programs of various stripes that are really designed to promote access to post-secondary education, but also, authorizing programs designed to help students complete, right? Everything from childcare to programs that are designed to help keep students engaged and through kind of graduation in the post-secondary space, but also things like strengthening the institutions themselves, including things like educator preparation that have a huge impact on the work you do in licensure and certification. So again, all equity focused laws, but other areas of the Department of Education's work that are just kind of front and center for yours. Obviously, the civil rights requirements of the federal structure, everything from Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to Title IX, around most commonly thought of through the perspective of athletics, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, workforce programs, including implementation of Perkins Career and Technical Education Act that funds both high school and community college programs in your states. And then, of course, research, including the work of IES and the programs that the department administers to support the work of state agencies like the regional labs and comp centers, and of course the work of NCES and National Center for Education Statistics and the National Center for Education Research. So just a lot of federal areas to think about, but that's just in the Department of Ed. So we also have to think about kind of the role the federal government plays in other parts of students' lives. Kind of probably most prominently would be the kind of family and child nutrition programs, including the school lunch program administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Talk a little bit about this in a minute, but this will be a big focus of Congress's work next year. It's obviously been hugely important during the pandemic period, especially early on when so many schools were closed. So a lot of investment there, but also a lot of important policy too, to make sure that kids are able and ready to learn. Broadband connectivity programs like the E-rate that provides subsidized broadband access for schools and libraries across the United States. But also emergency programs like the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which now has helped to connect more families to broadband at home for digital learning. And then lastly, of course, a big federal role in early childhood education and childcare and health programs. So programs like Head Start, Early Head Start, the Child Care and Development Block Grant, the Medicaid programs that help provide health benefits to students and families, but also provide supports for some of the covered activities under IDEA. So just a wide range of federal programs and policies that NASBE, I think, does a terrific job of monitoring and providing information out to the membership so that you can engage as appropriate from where you sit as a state board leader. So lastly, just kind of turning to the, current conversation, I think we're at an interesting moment in August of 2022, education policy at the federal level. Really, I always like to think of, what are the kind of big currents that are shaping how federal policymakers approach some of the programs we just mentioned, but also some of, what they might want to do on a forward-looking basis. For the last 2 years, the driving pressure on the system, internally has been this very closely divided Congress. So we've got a 50-50 Senate. That's only the fourth time in US history that that's happened, the second time in about the last 25 years, which is interesting, but the fourth time in history. But also a really closely divided House, right? With the kind of a 5-seat majority on the Democratic side. And, what does that mean for education policy and other policy? It means, right, the White House and the leadership of the House and Senate have to really closely count votes. It means that Senate Democrats especially have a huge amount of sway over policy, as we just kind of witnessed over the last 8 months with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and others from very kind of closely divided states. For us, as you know, in the education space, I think that has not slowed a lot of work in education policy, but it certainly does push, I think, the system in a helpful way to kind of a point of centrism, which I think is very helpful. You know, and the White House has been looking for opportunities to pass legislation on a bipartisan basis. Can't move anything through the U.S. Senate without 60 votes because of the filibuster, unless you kind of use some special parliamentary maneuvers that are very difficult to exercise. So we've seen a focus on things like the infrastructure bill that are helpful to kids on the broadband side and to families on broadband, but also schools and safe drinking water and other issues. So, you know, we're going to talk for a minute about how that could change, right, in a few months. So looking to 2023, right, we will have a number of factors that I think push the system in a different direction. The first is always new members following a congressional election cycle. So, you know, depending on the outcome in November, it could be a lot of new members in the Congress in early 2023. We know that no matter what happens with the elections, there are going to be a lot of changes in the education committees in the House and Senate. So we have leaders of those committees now, some of whom are retiring, some of whom are term limited out of their leadership position on those committees. So, you know, we could see as many as 3 of the 4 education leaders moving on to different roles or retiring. And that has a huge impact on what the committees decide to focus on. So that's a big deal. And then lastly, you know, we could and will likely see a shift of party control after the midterm elections. Of course, nobody can predict that with certainty, but if you look at past election cycles over the last 20 years, when the White House is controlled by one party, the other party tends to, during this election cycle, do very well. Based on the most recent cycles of the last couple of decades, they think that could be about a 12-point swing for the Republicans this cycle, which would mean that every member of Congress that wasn't in a 12-point or better position, kind of looking at President Biden's recent election, probably is going to have to be working hard. So that could be as much as a 45 member swing in the House and as much of a 5-member swing in the Senate. So it's all to say a lot of change on the horizon. Plus, we have a White House that has now moved through at least 3 of its big priorities. So it's going to be looking for a reset into next year, which creates an opportunity for them to think through a range of issues, including what their education priorities are. And then lastly, you know, there's always the unexpected. There are, you know, there are economic factors like the inflation the country's experiencing now that are influencing federal decisions. We have pretty significant foreign policy emergencies that are taking up a lot of airtime in the Congress, especially among kind of leadership. We're moving into if you can believe it, presidential election cycle next year. Sorry to report that. And then, you know, you never know, the X factor of other types of natural disasters and other emergencies. So there are a lot of things that could really slow the focus on education policy next year. But we, of course, expect, as would be the norm, that there'll be 1 or 2 big issues that we'll hope that you're engaged in. Just kind of quickly, I mentioned there could be a lot of change in the leadership of the education authorizing committees next year. And just to put a finer point on that, the authorizing committees are the committees responsible for education policy. And that's contrasted with the committees that are about spending, the appropriations committees. You can see the authorizers on top and the appropriators below. A lot of change here with the retirement of Senator Burr. Senator Murray's likely spinning off the Help Committee in the Senate, will probably become the full Appropriations Committee chair, ranking member last year. Representative Fox has to get a waiver if she wants to continue as either the chair or ranking member of the House authorizing committees. So, you know, for the next few months, though, these are the most important people in education policy at the federal level. If you're from these states, and if you're from the states of the people that might take these roles on in the next Congress, expect Abby and Paulo and others to say, hey, sometimes we're going to need your help with that member to really convey a perspective. They're going to want to listen to you as a state leader from their constituency. So that's why I wanted to highlight this for you. And of course, there are other education committee members that are important too. Thinking about possible policy priorities for next year, you know, there's a lot of focus in the committees this year on workforce policy, including updating the National Apprenticeship Act and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. These are Department of Labor initiatives, but they have, I think, important touch points with education, including kind of a growing congressional interest in trying to use apprenticeship as a way to boost the early childhood workforce quality. Of course, the WIOA authorizes programs like Youth Build that you see in a lot of secondary schools. So we care about those programs. Again, bipartisan interest here. I think this will continue regardless of whichever party controls the Congress next year. I think childcare and early learning will continue to be a big focus. So there are, you know, even before the pandemic, but now sort of post-pandemic, huge number of challenges in many communities, especially rural and low income areas, in accessing high quality childcare. It was a big part of the president's Build Back Better initiative that was left out of the bill that was approved a few weeks ago by the Congress. So there's an expectation that there's going to be some bipartisan interest in thinking about childcare, especially next year. And there are some interesting Republican and Democratic proposals to try to shore up the childcare industry. So again, I think that's going to be a big focus next year. Looking beyond the education committees, data privacy, including how companies handle the data of children, including in the school context, is a big issue in the Congress now. It will continue to be a big issue next year. As I mentioned earlier, school lunch and nutrition programs are set to be reauthorized through the Farm Bill. We're expecting that to be a big focus of work next year. Expecting continued pressure in the Congress from the states around immigration and the attendant kind of impact on schools. So that's one to look out for. And, you know, I think always we're, you know, have this ongoing annual conversation about funding for Department of Ed and health and human services programs that serve young kids. So all of those are out there. A few more just to, again, put kind of a finer point on this, looking kind of outside the Beltway to implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was approved last November. Every state in the last few weeks has filed either a notice of interest in the $42 billion broadband infrastructure funding that'll throw through the U.S. Department of Education, or filed applications to secure some formula funding for digital equity planning. So all 50 states are going to be doing digital equity planning over the next year. I think you should know that because those folks are tasked with consulting education leaders at the state and local level to make sure that that broadband connectivity that's contemplated by the infrastructure law is having a positive impact on education. But also, there's also infrastructure investment in safe drinking water, huge area of leadership for NASBE. Things like electric school buses, kind of related to the White House's climate agenda, and other things that will be. And this is all, again, this is all work that's been done that is now being implemented by Department of Commerce, EPA, Department of Transportation, and other things that could have impact in your states. I mentioned we have not finished the fiscal year 23 appropriations process. When Congress comes back in September after Labor Day, they will have to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government's doors open, right? Because the federal fiscal year ends at the end of September. But we're already looking to the fiscal year 2024 process as well. Why? Because the White House is working right now with all of the agencies to develop the president's budget request for the next fiscal year. So this is a walk and chew gum kind of scenario. It'll probably be, depending on what happens in the election, they might finish the fiscal year 23 process during the lame duck between kind of November and Christmas. They may not, might spill over to the new Congress, in which case the president's budget request for 24 would be delayed. But again, organizationally, we have to be talking to both sides of the coin to make sure that the education programs are properly funded, that we really care about as state leaders. Again, the big formula programs like Title I, IDEA for special ed students, things like the state longitudinal data systems program that supports your data work in your state education agencies, CTE, state grants, et cetera. Last thing on the future look, right? We would expect if control of the Congress shifts to the Republicans, that there'll be at least some conversation about the parental rights measures that have been introduced in a lot of states. I think that conversation is going to bubble up to the Congress. I think we'll see heavy focus on oversight of the significant K-12 funding that flowed through the ESSER program as a result of the pandemic. I think there are early conversations starting in the background about the future of the federal assessment and accountability requirements. It'll be a while till they take up the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, but number of groups are beginning to think about what those provisions should look like. Data systems, research, just a lot of topics that I think could bubble up among the new chairs of the Education Committee. So thank you for listening to me talk for 25 minutes. Happy to pause there and take a breath and respond to questions you have about any or all of this or other things that you've heard about that may be of interest to your states.
Great, thanks so much, Reg. And while people think about questions they have, again, feel free to use your hand raising feature so we know who might be interested in asking. Well, oftentimes I get the question about, well, how does NASBE decide, where it's going to be on certain federal issues? And I wanted to just talk a little bit about that. And Reg, you and Abby can help sort of fill in some of the gaps. Because obviously as a member organization, we're driven by the perspectives of our members. And fortunately, we have those in some ways codified in our public education positions document. And this is a document that is both supported by a committee within the NASBE governance structure, the Public Education Positions Committee. And the document itself and the words in the document are voted on at the Delegate Assembly, which takes place at our annual conference, which gives me a perfect opportunity to remind all of you, if you haven't done so already, I would love to see you at our annual conference. It's taking place in late October, October 26th through 29th. I hope it's a priority for you to come. But that is one place where each state has a vote and can cast its vote and reflect the proposals being made by the Public Education Positions Committee for modifications to our public education positions document. And again, it's very important to us as the staff and the board as well, because that then gives us guidance about what we can weigh in on and the perspectives that we take on those issues. So oftentimes when we're asked by a partner organization to weigh in on a particular issue, the first question we ask ourselves is, what does our public education positions document say on this particular issue? And we're guided by that process. We also have a government affairs committee. Woody Exley is the chair of that committee. Woody's on this call. And Woody, feel free to chime in as well. The purpose of that committee is to stay apprised of different issues that may be surfacing in very much of a real-time way, because that committee meets quite frequently, and be updated by staff, be updated by Reg and his team, and offer their perspectives on things that may be emerging to the extent that NASBE is being asked to weigh in on a particular issue or what have you. Sometimes we are presented with letters, from other organizations, like the Data Quality Campaign might send us a letter saying, hey, look, we're seeing all this debate about data issues, data privacy issues. we've formulated a position, are interested in having NASBE sign on. And so that goes through an evaluation process internally. And again, we look at our documents, we understand the positions that our members have, and then we, we'll weigh in or not, depending on the nature of the issue. There are times when we might weigh in individually as an organization on something that we know our members care deeply about and have a perspective. And then, we leverage the expertise of Reg and his team to, draft those appropriate letters and so forth and so on. So again, we take very seriously our role, but are also very careful that what we do and the actions that we take are reflective of the positions that our members have expressed. Abby, do you want to add anything to that, or Woody, do you want to comment on that a little bit in terms of the perspective of the Government Affairs Committee?
Well, just at the Government Affairs Committee, one thing that's really interesting is the way the members from the different states share the legislative activities that are going on in their states. And that's very enlightening.
Yes.
And I'd make a little pitch here. We're entitled to have one member from each state on the board, on the Government Affairs Committee. And we have a number of states that are not represented and would love to have them represented. So if any of you new members are interested in serving on this committee, get in touch with me.
Great, thanks, Woody. Abby, anything else you wanna add?
I'll just echo Woody's statement too. It's the Government Affairs Committee is a great committee because not only does it provide just updates on what's on the deck in terms of congressional legislation or particular regulations, but the conversation among states about what's percolating in their state policies is really helpful for NASBE because, in my opinion, any good federal policy comes from great state policy. And our ability to influence federal policy really means that we need to understand how it's working within your states, what's being successful, where the challenges are. And those are the stories that federal lawmakers find so impactful and so important because they ultimately want to have federal legislation help and support state policies in the best interest of kids. So the Government Affairs Committee, even though it says government, you might think federal government, it's a good combination of both federal and state perspectives.
The other thing, again, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of organizations that are monitoring federal activity all the time. And we stay in touch with them because we often have very shared interests and aligned interests. Other times we might have divergent interests because as you know, and in some ways, as Reg diplomatically sort of suggested, there are times when, hey, hot button issues surface and there are differences of opinions between different organizations, all of whom may ultimately want great things for kids in education space, but may have different points of view. And so there's almost, very frequent kind of engagement among and between organizations, checking in with each other about, language in bills, position statements, and what have you. And NASBE, prides itself on our, both the integrity of how we approach these things and our credibility in the federal debates in terms of how we interact with our partners and with the federal government. I think the other thing worth saying, and we will soon be joined by the Deputy Secretary, who will offer some reflections on the U.S. Department. That's another key area of federal interaction. It's not, the secretary is the face of the department, but more often than not, we're dealing with others who are, supporting different initiatives. Sometimes it's about broadband access and the digital divide. Sometimes it might be about assessments and accountability or compliance with ESSER requirements or what have you. And so we work hard to maintain both a deep understanding, because a lot of, in addition to the congressional bills that receive a very high profile and high level of coverage, there are always regulations that are being put out for comment and guidance documents that are being issued and position statements coming out from the department that have to be either interpreted or communicated back to the different states and so forth and so on. So we work hard, again, leveraging our network of contacts and support structures to identify those, to weigh in on those. We even we even monitor state Supreme Court action. And Fern knows that there was just a recent court case that involved Maine, and that got quite a bit of conversation because it has implications for how, what the state, what the federal government's position is going to be on certain types of state activities, and what needs to take place. So
Paulo,
with that, yeah, go ahead, Woody.
Paulo, if I can extend my commercial a little, I see that we have people on this call from Arizona and Hawaii, neither of which states are represented on the Government Affairs Committee. So if they would perhaps get in touch with you, and then you can put them in touch with me.
Yeah,
that would be great.
You can also just put something in the chat and say, hey, I'd be interested, and we can follow up with you.
Okay, great.
Abby, anything else you want to add?
Well, I have to continue both the GAC pitch as well as the public education positions pitch too. And for GAC, one of the great things about it is it's a way to directly influence federal policy. And GAC has had a wonderful tradition and history of making a real difference, both in terms of statute, regulations, and guidance. When we hear members ask questions about things like the impact of how chronic absenteeism measures during the pandemic, we're able to take those to the department and make sure that the guidance answers those questions, and also brings concerns to the department that we're hearing from the field, as well as things that are working well. So it's more than just conversation. I think it's direct and tangible influence that GAC has had a long history and tradition of. And I don't think there's a Sarah is here from the Public Education Positions Committee, which is a fabulous committee that really does shape our policy positions, our education positions. And just this past year, the committee has tackled two incredibly difficult issues too, and that's around the educator workforce and school leadership. Crafting and expanding those positions and all the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic is really about how do we build that pipeline to recruit and retain teachers and educators in the best interest of our kids. And that committee does a fabulous job. And Lisa, who was the chair, and both Woody, are really good about keeping meetings to 1 hour maximum.
Right.
So your commitment is usually just 1 hour. And Woody especially starts on time and ends on time
Right.
too. So I have to say that.
Well, forgive me, I have another point to make, that the people from Hawaii, you have no excuse because of your time zone, because we have a member from Guam who is very loyal and attending and has to get up very early in the morning. So no excuses from Hawaii.
This is Lauren. I had already volunteered before this meeting, so I don't know if what the process is, but I had mentioned it and discussed it with our board previously.
Perfect.
Very good. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you.
Great. And Jackie is weighing in as well from Arizona. Perfect. Other questions? Are there any particular federal issues percolating away in your states that you want to raise, just for the edification of others about the kinds of things that you might be sorting through at your on your boards?
Well, I don't want to do too much talking here, but Reg, that was very enlightening presentation. And you mentioned the safe water, and that's important here. And what is happening? What do you expect to be happening?
Yeah, thanks, Woody. So that was that was an example of one of the laws that Congress approved in November of last year. Pretty sweeping bipartisan infrastructure bill that included a number of safe drinking water investments, but importantly, I think for this group, was dedicated funding for safe drinking water in schools. So if you'll kind of think back to the work that NASBE's done in this area, responsive kind of federal investment to ensure that the kids that are in typically older facilities are not being subjected to lead and other kind of dangerous poisons as a result of their drinking water system. So those are grants that will flow out. Just to be aware of, right? So if it's a particular problem in your state, I think if districts are coming to you looking for help, you might point them to that grant program.
So would those grants go, you mean, directly to the school district?
Yeah, Yeah, I think so. I'd have to look back, Woody, at exactly how
Yeah.
it works, and we can do that for you. But and of course, it's not an unlimited amount of funding,
Yeah.
but it's great that they finally dedicated funding for that purpose.
And in fact, if there are those of you who want to learn more about safe drinking water in schools, as well as other school facilities issues, Megan put in the chat a reference to the school Healthy School Facilities Network. Megan, do you want to say a little bit about the work of that network and how it relates to some of the clean drinking water? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paolo, and thanks, Reg, for highlighting this in your presentation. Woody, we would love for Connecticut and any state to apply to this network. Applications are open right now. It's a very brief application, so we don't want that to be a hindrance to acting on your interest. And applications are due September 16th, the goal being to bring together 5 states to work collaboratively to improve school facilities within their state. And there are many aspects of a healthy school facility, from water, as we've talked about, healthy drinking water, to lighting, to removing asbestos and mold, and a whole host of other issues that we know through research have an impact on student academic success, their attendance rates, and their health, right? I mean, primarily, you want to have healthy school environments for a healthy school, healthy children and healthy adults. And so saying that, please, we hope you'll apply to participate through that network. We will be supporting you in connecting with the federal agencies that are leading the grant programs that Reg just spoke about. So U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and others. So you can reach out to me with any questions you might have. I'm happy to discuss with anyone further.
Great. Thanks so much, Megan. I think another thing worth mentioning, it just occurred to me here, is that we also, our legislative conference also plays a special role in our federal advocacy and monitoring work. Our legislative conference is always held in the Washington area, and part of it always includes the opportunity for board members to visit with their congressional delegations. And this is one of those things that some of you may already have a relationship with your congressperson or one of your U.S. senators or both of them, and so you may already have that established. But other times it's helpful to go with other board members. I know the Utah delegation was out in full force the last legislative conference. They had several board members as well as their state superintendent. They all went together to meet with their congressional delegation, members of their congressional delegation, and that's a great opportunity. Again, get to know, as Superintendent Glass was saying, that those relationships are really powerful, and especially when your members, they care about what you think, they care about the work you do. You establish a level of comfort, and they're willing to listen to your point of view on the topics that they face. So we work hard to make the legislative conference an opportunity to not only hear about issues, but also to facilitate those kind of interactions. And invariably, we have members who drop in and say hi at our conference, and representatives of the U.S. Department who also make presentations as part of that work. Any other questions on your minds about this topic of federal relations and federal activity?
Paolo, I just would like to say,
Please.
I started out serving on NASBE on the GAC because I personally felt as a board member that I got a lot of information on what was happening in my state. But recognizing that the federal government, carries a big stick and that they have a lot of say over what happens in education, I found NASBE to be a terrific resource to give me background and knowledge into how things work in education at the federal level. And I just thought that was invaluable. And as a result, we were even able to invite some of our members of Congress who came and spoke to our board on different issues. And I think that was really helpful to let them know that we're interested in what they do for us in education back in Washington, D.C. And it gave them a chance, to interact with us. So I don't think any state board member could get that kind of education and that kind of knowledge through any other way I know of than through the help of NASBE and what they provide us for state boards.
And Janet reminds me of one other thing, and it's a good thing for me to check with all of you. You all should also be on the mailing list for the NASBE monthly newsletter. Does that sound familiar to you? Are you getting that? If what I'm saying is coming to you I've never seen such a thing, send us a note to make sure we have the email address. Sometimes it's also like your formal email address with the department, you may not open or read, and you want us to send you stuff at a different email address or whatever. We can accommodate that. But in that, every month, there is a section of that newsletter that summarizes, emerging federal activity from a NASBE point of view, things that we are doing, things that have been discussed at the Government Affairs Committee meeting, things that we know that members will want to be, their understanding and enhanced or awareness raised about things that are going on. So be on the lookout. That's another way to stay informed about federal activity, again, with a specific point of view, since it's put together by NASBE staff in consultation with our Government Affairs Committee and our advisors. All right, members of staff, anything else we're wanting to cover? We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so maybe I will take care of a couple other housekeeping issues. You saw I put in the chat an encouragement to schedule for the annual conference. I hope you take that to heart. You can even do that right now while we're waiting. I know it involves registration fees and so forth and so on. Oh, and the Deputy Secretary has just joined us, so let's let her in. Deputy Secretary Marten.
Yes.
How are you today?
Great. How are you?
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. Let me give you a quick introduction, and then we'll let you go. It's so very, very appreciative of you taking time. We know what a crazy schedule you have, but we also know that we value the great relationship we have with the U.S. Department of Education, as do you. And so we're really flattered that you could make time to give us a little bit of, an overview and a little bit of your personal story, because again, frankly, I think always the tone and direction of a federal agency is driven by its leaders and their perspectives and their backgrounds and their passions. And you tell such a wonderful story about yourself and the great relationship you have with the Secretary and the great work and perspective that you're bringing to the table. Cindy Marten is started as a teacher. This has been sort of with all our speakers today, started as a teacher, worked her way up through the administrative ranks, ultimately landing as the superintendent of the San Diego School District in California, and then invited to join Miguel Cardona at the U.S. Department of Education. She serves as the Deputy Secretary, in fact, number 2 in the organization. And she's just a wonderful person. I won't tell much else of her story because she does such a wonderful job of that herself. You are before new State Board of Education members, and I know you know deeply how important the role of state boards is, and that new members often find themselves with lots of questions, looking for guidance, looking for information, and in some ways wanting to put a face to a name, to a bureaucracy. So Cindy, I'll turn it over to you. Take it away. And we know you're very pressed for time, so we won't do any questions. We'll just let you wrap up, and then we'll let you return to your day.
Thank you so much. What a warm introduction, and just to be able to pop on and see all of you, and thank you for your service and what you've stepped into to be able to serve and lead. We already have something in common because this is about service, and it is a very busy day here at the Department of Ed. The president is going to be on in any minute now. If you're following CNN, notifying and talking about the loan forgiveness that's about to happen. It's a historic day in education, what's happening today. And many people have worked on this for many, many years, but that's all on the news in just a couple of minutes. He was going to be on at 2:15. Well, that's our time. So here we are in DC, and any minute now you'll hear that. But what a warm introduction. I really appreciate that. And to know my story is to know the story of people who are committed to service. And this is my 34th year in education. I taught kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, elementary literacy. I was a principal at an inner city school in San Diego I was there for 10 years, and it was a school with 1,000 children, pre-kindergarten through fifth grade, 100% Title I, 85% English learners. I say every risk factor known to public education was at that campus, and I spent 10 years there. And I say if you could teach kindergarten, you could pretty much do anything, can't you? So I did that, and then I was superintendent in San Diego Unified School District for 8 years before coming here to serve the Biden-Harris administration alongside Secretary Cardona. And it's a huge honor. The way the administration put our team together is 1 in 3 of us here at the Department of Education have classroom teacher experience, which is awesome. And to be able to know that the policy and the work that we're doing here is designed and led by many, many teachers who spent time in the classroom in front of children teaching. So I just want to thank you and this entire NASBE community for all the work that you're doing around the entire country. The idea of being able to bring school board members together and create community so that you can create innovation amongst and between one another to help move things forward is really phenomenal. It's the best way that work can ever get done. So all of you new members, I just have to say congratulations on your new role, whether you were elected or appointed, and I'm learning that it's different in different places. You know this already, but hear it from me that you're assuming such a critical role in our educational system, especially now with the historic levels of funding that are going out. It is up to us to be able to be stewards of these investments so that it's not just, I believe, like what's happening in the next 20 months will impact the next 20 years, how we make these investments work on behalf of our students. So just take a moment right now to praise your states for everything you're doing to elevate the kinds of things that matter so much. I see so many of you are elevating student voice, and putting student voice in the center of this is so critical and so important. I think according to the new analysis, thanks to NASBE, more than 400 students serve as members of state boards or state advisory councils in 32 states, and that's up from only 25 only 5 years ago. So that's big progress. I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that we're showing all of our students what it looks like. What does it look like to use your voice and have a sense of agency, to be an agent for change, that you can make a positive impact in the world? So the work that all you're doing it on behalf of the communities that you serve. It's not overlooked, and it's from the bottom of my heart that I'm thanking you because of your dedication to our nation's students. And my background as superintendent in San Diego Unified, which is one of the nation's largest districts, it allowed me to work hand in hand with the state board when I was in California. And so I understood the board's responsibility in implementing all of the statewide education policy. And I saw how that policy has the power to positively affect millions of students across the state. It was a leap for me in the beginning. And as a classroom teacher, I knew what I was doing had a direct impact on students because I had the 20, 25 kids in front of me. But I then saw how state level decisions can impact millions of students. And so here I am now as Deputy Secretary of Education, and my appreciation for your work has not changed. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the difference state school board members can make. You guys are thought leaders. You make policy, you inform policy, you inspire wise action. And because of you, you can be the champions for children and youth, and you end up being the guardians for hope for our future. I know the job that you're doing as state board members, it's not easy, especially the last few years. COVID-19 pandemic sent a shockwave across the education profession, across the world. Our students and our teachers, administrators all over the country, every community and at large, everyone had to figure out new ways to engage our work together. And so through all of that, I saw the state boards always there, being vigilant, guiding the work with the communities to provide the best possible experiences given the circumstances we were all facing, especially while our many schools were closed. So now we can look at where we are today over the last 18 months, largely driven by the American Rescue Plan and a comprehensive COVID-19 response. I can say proudly that the Biden-Harris administration was able to provide schools with unprecedented resources so that they could not just reopen, but reopen safely. And as a result, all of our nation's schools were open in the past school year. And now we see our students, everyone's coming back. The fall is starting. Some schools have already started. Some are getting ready to start. They're getting ready for another school year. And what I can see across the country is that everybody has the tools that they need to minimize the spread of COVID-19 and to mitigate the impact, and they're opening safely. They're staying open all year long, ensuring students are learning in the classroom. If that was enough, I could just say, okay, that's it, Paulo, back to you, but it's not, because we all know that there are still gaps. There are gaps in equity. There are gaps in opportunity that exist outside of the pandemic's grasp. Those gaps were already there. We know the gaps had a drastic impact on our nation's education system, and they've left some students with significant needs. And teachers are burned out. They're leaving the profession altogether. We know students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, students with disabilities. We know our English learners, our students even in rural communities, their teachers, they've had to bear so much of the burden when it comes to the gaps in opportunity and equity. So work needs to be done here. And it's really, I keep thinking about your voice and your leadership and how your voice and your leadership matters, because you're all using the American Rescue Plan funds as intended to address all of those issues head on. You understand the assignment. You understand what these dollars are to be used for, and you're directing them to address these gaps that have long persisted. All around the country, I've been touring and looking at how the American Rescue Plan funds are being used. I see them supporting professional development for teachers. I see the funds being used to hire quality tutors. They're connecting students to after-school programs. We're hiring high-quality professionals to support students' social, emotional, mental health needs. We're bringing on more counselors and psychologists and other professionals, even healthcare, school-based health centers. So all of these federal funds are assisting in closing the gaps, and it allows our kids to receive what I say. We got to define equity. How do we use these funds? Well, we define equity as each student gets what they need, when they need it, in the way that they need it, where they need it. And smart, wise actions by leaders like you allow us to use these funds and those dollars, and then teachers get the resources they need so our students can be successful. And it happens in big partnership with student well-being and monitoring the wellness of the students in their care. That's what happens when we direct these dollars the right way. So here we are at the department. We're dedicated to helping all of our districts and states figure out how to find solutions to big problems, and using the American Rescue Plan funds to do that. One way we're doing it is on a large scale. We have something called the Best Practices Clearinghouse, and we're using that to showcase all the innovative ways that the ARP dollars are being utilized across the country. So you can tap into that. We're also, I wanted to point out that the ARP is not the only way the Biden-Harris administration and our department is working to make sure we're delivering and ensuring on equity and inclusion in our schools. We've also introduced policies and initiatives that focus on specific ways that we can help our students and educators feel safe, seen, supported in and out of classrooms. One of the initiatives that we launched was the National Partnership for Student Success. That initiative is designed to help ensure that all of our nation's students are able to thrive now and in the future. And if you saw the President's State of the Union address back in January, that's when he launched the National Partnership for Student Success. It's a nationwide 3-year effort that's bringing together what we're saying committed, high quality education and service organizations, including NASBE. NASBE is part of the National Partnership for Student Success. And it's with this partnership, all of the organizations have committed to the President's call to action, which is recruit, train, support, and engage an additional 250,000 Americans to serve as tutors, mentors, and student success coaches for students and youth in pre-K through high school. This initiative is led by the Department of Education, but we're partnered up with the AmeriCorps and with the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University. And including those two key organizations, there's almost 100 coalition of organizations all committed to seeing our students' success and grow. We need more caring, committed adults, not less. And I'm really grateful that NASBE is part of the national partnership. And then there's another initiative that we launched this summer. It's called Engage Every Student. That was also born out of the President's charge that the American Rescue Plan needs to be used to support summer learning, because we have to strive to keep our students on track and close the opportunity gap. So we needed a robust summer of learning, joy, and enrichment. So that program, Engage Every Student, is helping communities also figure out how to take these federal funds alongside other state and local funding sources to ensure that any single child anywhere in the country has a spot, has a seat in high quality out of school time program, that they can have one, whether it's a summer program before school or after school, that any student that wants that. We saw summer school programs be decimated with lack of funding over the last 2 decades. These dollars are intended to give every student who wants a summer learning spot or before or after school spot to have something. And that's the Engage Every Student initiative. And then last but not least, I have to highlight the piece of legislation that President Biden just signed into law in June. It's called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We fondly call it BISCA over here because we, like educators, have acronyms and names for everything. But the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is the most significant piece of legislation to reduce gun violence in 30 years. This bill is providing $2 billion in funding to support safe and healthy students. It helps hire school staff to be school-based staff, health professionals to strengthen the pipe, and it also helps strengthen the pipeline for people that want to go into school-based health profession. This act also provides funding for crisis intervention and the red flag laws. These are so important because the red flag law allows a parent, a teacher, or a counselor to flag for a court that a child or a student is exhibiting violent tendencies, threatening classmates, or experiencing suicidal thoughts, and that might make them a danger to self or others. That's built in there. This BISCA also provides vital funding to address the youth mental health crisis in the country. It's including trauma experienced by survivors of gun violence. It also invests in anti-violence programs that works directly in communities that are affected by gun crimes. And it requires that young people under the age of 21 undergo enhanced background checks before they purchase a gun. And it closes the so-called boyfriend loophole. So if you're convicted of an assault against your significant other, you can't buy or own a gun. I just put all of those big programs and policies and initiatives in place to say that these are game changers for education. And I believe we're just getting started. So we need your voices now more than ever. Now is the time to double down on the work of reimagining what schools can and should be for every single student. We can see what's possible. This is our moment. It's our moment to be bold, to ensure that every child in every town, in every city, in every state across the country truly can access an excellent education. So I guess I have to say, of course, states and communities have to continue to invest in education. We have to ensure that these federal resources are properly targeted to those with the greatest need, because as you plan to take action, let us know how we can support you. Secretary Cardona and I are committed to being a service agency. We want to better understand your challenges. We want to find solutions together. Like I said at the beginning, I believe that our decisions over the next 20 months will impact the state of education over the next 20 years. This is our time to work harder with a greater sense of urgency, making our schools better than ever and equal to our children's dreams. Thanks for having me.
Please join me in giving a great round of thanks to Deputy Secretary Marten. Deputy Secretary, thank you so much. We know your schedule is very busy, very much appreciate. And on behalf of NASBE, we very much appreciate the strong partnership and the open channels of communication that we have with the department. Thanks so much for taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your service. Bye-bye.
I'm going to turn it over to the dynamic duo of Renee Lang and Byron Ernest, who are going to give us a delightful insights into communications for the state board member. Take it away, Renee.
So, as Paula mentioned, I'm the communications director for NASBE, and I'm so excited to talk with you all today on effective communication strategies for state boards and the role that you play in that effort. This is to give you a lay of the land of where we're going for our conversation today. First, we're going to start with what's in the news right now. What does the public really think? Who do they trust? And where do state board members fit into all this? I'm going to end with some tips and tricks that you guys can take home to your states and to your boards, as well as some Q&A with the great Byron Ernest. I'm really excited about that. So these are what the current headlines kind of look like. Show of hands, How many of you have seen headlines like this in your states? We've got teacher leader shortages. We've got student enrollment is down. Partisan issues like health standards and parents' rights, changes in social studies. So these are all issues that are top of mind and top of kind of your above the fold in the news. And it doesn't matter what state you're from. But there are changes in the perceptions on public education too. So Education Next just put out their annual poll on public education, and overall, the findings indicate that the public is simply tired of the pandemic. I am tired of the pandemic. They're tired of disruptions. They're tired of change and uncertainty. Importantly, public confidence, and this is the graph right here, public confidence in public education is waning, and it's increasingly partisanship. Now, just 47% of Republicans assign their local school an A or a B, compared with 56% of Democrats. For many of years, this was kind of like on par with the R's and the D's, and they were kind of aligned with their public support. So enthusiasm for most, if not perhaps all policy innovations is also waned a little bit. This is kind of a change. So, you know, in the midst of the pandemic, I think the public was really open to some innovations within the school setting. And they're, you know, really interested in kind of trying new things, but parents aren't as anxious about learning loss. They're not as anxious about mitigation strategies in the school setting. In fact, almost half of respondents for the next poll said that they are confident that their child will catch up. And they want an equal focus on academics, as well as looking at the social and emotional skill building. Another important finding, no surprise, is that the parents are still engaged. Many are vocal and they're opinionated. We see this in some of the headlines, but despite the widespread attention to disputes in your local school board meetings and perhaps even at the state level, most parents are not actually that concerned about what their child is learning in the classroom around race issues and racism and race-related issues. Almost 2/3 of parents say that their child's school gives the right amount of attention to the topic. So what you're really seeing is kind of like a vocal minority on these issues. And it's highly partisan. This kind of deviates from kind of the overall R&D views. The majority of Democrats say it's just not enough. Republicans say that it's too much. Public consumption of the news is changing too. So you've got, you know, more and more Americans are getting their news through digital platforms. This was not that different, you know, 5, even 10 years ago. So 84% say they often or sometimes get their news from a smartphone, computer, or tablet. And 51% do so often. They're not opening up that newspaper as much anymore. Now, the second chart here, you've got, you know, social, shows you that social is king. Nearly 1/3 of Americans regularly get their news from Facebook, of all places. Now that's kind of scary to me, but it's the truth. So this is research that's coming from Pew Research Center, and they do a lot of public polling around media and public perceptions of the media and so forth. Now, not on here, but podcasts. A lot of folks, about 1/4, get their news from podcasts as well. So that is an increasingly popular tool and source of information as well. I wanted to share these data to you because it focuses around state house reporting. This is fresh data from Pew. The last time they did this survey was 2014, and they just did it and they just released it. They took a look at all 50 state capitals and their state house reporting. So you can see that it's up. There's more State House reporting staff, just marginally 11%. But the big shift is that they have more part-time reporters at the State House. So kind of those reporters that are kind of might be moonlighting and reporting on State House legislative issues, or they might be sharing their duties with a number of other disciplines or beats, as they call them. So, and of that, I wanted to particularly point out that a number of the State House reporters are actually students. Nebraska and Missouri are both, those Midwestern states are both kind of top on that. It doesn't surprise me so much because Missouri has a huge J school, journalism school. And so that they may be pulling from those journalism schools as well. But I think that that's an important point because we talk a lot about student engagement and how important that is at the board level. And so that may be a great source for you to connect with in state reporting and State House, that newsroom. But at the same time, there's no trust in the media. No more than half of Americans feel confident in the news media. 63% agree questioning the media is a good thing, but they also want to see that confidence in news reporting rise. So, there's a lack of trust in information that they're receiving. Now, I think that there's a really powerful note here that the majority of Americans seek out full news. Seek out a full news story. They go a step further after hearing about an event or an issue or something along those lines from a neighbor or a friend or a family member. That is just the most common way to get your news. And why that's important is that trust and connection. People are more willing to believe information if it's coming from a family member, a friend, someone that they trust. That's always, I think, been a really big factor in sharing of information. So who is trusted outside of your family or your friend or your neighbor? So this is research from Gallup, and they do honesty and ethics survey of professions annually. Nurses, medical doctors, grade school teachers, nurses, medical doctors, teachers always come out on top as the most trusted professions. This has not budged in a number of years. This is a little lower than the past few years, but that's understandable. In the midst of the pandemic, these were our heroes. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Teachers can be a really powerful ally in state board work. And we know this, we celebrate teacher voice all the time. But from our own research, we see evidence that there is confidence in state boards too, and other community leaders. So this is research, now this is pre-pandemic research that we conducted in 2018, 2019. We wanted to learn about public perceptions around SEL in a handful of states and messaging around that. It was part of a grant that we got to do a lot of work in the SEL space. But among these groups, what we found is community leaders, community partners such as Boys and Girls Clubs, the PTA, faith-based leaders. They're all seen as community leaders. They all can be effective messengers in this work. Importantly, 6 in 10 said that they were confident in their state board, more so than the governor or other elected officials. So I imagine that this number may be different now. We've been through a pandemic, there's lots of partisan issues, all of that. But I think there's still a really important lesson here that puts, and this is it puts state boards in a prime seat as communicators, or there is a definite potential there for it. So really, really important to keep in mind as well. What does this all mean? Well, it means opportunity, of course. It's an opportunity for state boards and state board members to use your positions to connect with the public and to share about the board's work. But I want you to keep in mind these three things. First, think engagement. Parents are more engaged, so there's opportunity there, of course, to connect with parents and families. We learned that people want a connection to the information that they're receiving. So go through, as you're kind of go through in your board's work, think about those engagement strategies. Think about cultivating, not just sharing about the work, but cultivating understanding for the work and the why in the board's work. And you need to be authentic about it. Be proactive, communicating at the front end and along the way. Boards shouldn't always make news when there's something bad going on or when they're at the end of their work. Think along the way how you can bring your stakeholders along and share and build that understanding. Be proactive about it. And finally, think non-traditional, think outside the box. What board activities, what communication strategies that you can use that are non-traditional and might be really effective for carrying your message. But before you get started, remember the rules of engagement. You are one member of a full board. So if we think back to the very first new member session, Paula pointed out that individual voices matter on the board, but the board acts as one collective voice. So it's critical that you as members work together to articulate and find agreement on a clear, cohesive message. And we heard this a little bit earlier too with Lou and Jason talking about how much they just collaborate between the state board and the department, and how some of that is informal and some of that is formal, but that means that they're all on the same page. If you have multiple voices speaking at the same things or different things, it can really be a disservice to the board's work. It kind of adds to the confusion. Okay, what's going on with the board? Why are they communicating in different threads? So think about that public messaging from the start, and who's going to carry those messages, who's going to be the messengers, who are going to be those spokesmen. So where should we start? Here's the fun part where we get into kind of the tips and the tricks. As an individual, the most important thing, I can't stress this enough, figure out what your board policies are around communicating with your stakeholders. I'm not sure what the number is anymore, but a number of boards, most if not all, have some sort of policy around communicating with the media, communicating with stakeholders, spokesmen. Some state boards have say that their spokesman is going to always be the chair. Others have different policies, and just know those guardrails. If you don't know them, ask your exec. If you have an exec, work with the SEA staff to figure out where those guardrails are and those limitations. And of course, actively listen, be a collaborator with your peers, your fellow board members, so that you are communicating internally so you can be effective communicators externally. As a board, also listen. Think about what your goals are for the work and kind of match your strategies and your audience targets with those goals. Think about your audience. Who are those messengers that you can use, those folks, sorry, I skipped ahead. Who are your audience? Who needs to know about that work? Who is really being impacted by that work and those decisions? And of course, decide on your spokespeople and identify those partnerships as well. Think about what your approaches are, decide on them, settle on them. What strategies are you using to communicate the work of the board? Could it be, it could be everything from tactical videos and social media messages to, and we're gonna get into this next, to convening focus groups and things like that. And then finally, and this is something that, about communications that you either love or you hate, but it never ends. You always have opportunities to kind of bring the messaging back to kind of re-highlight why you're doing something, seeing, kind of figuring out those pegs within the media or within, if a partner is doing similar work, see if you can partner with them and kind of revitalize the work of the board on that issue area. There's always opportunity. You just got to listen for it and find it, and watch for it. So next is my ideas for public engagement. I'm going to go through, there are 4 and lots of different tips and tricks and things that you can kind of put in your toolkit. So this one is media engagement. Now there's traditional ways of doing it and there's non-traditional ways. Of course, there's always the press release. I think everybody knows what a press release is. Some people think that they're the most useless things in the world, boring, all this. So they have their time and place, right? I will absolutely admit to that. But I think what's stronger is building relationships with your local media. So that's those State House reporters that I was talking about before, the editorial staff in your newspaper of record, that relationship building will really be helpful in the long run. So that is even stronger than, say, a simple press release. Other strategies, the Tennessee board puts out a monthly newsletter about all of the board proceedings, what the board voted on and what's coming up in the next meeting, public comments. It's like a tick list of what the board worked on that month. DC does something similar, but they do it in video form, which is super cool. They create a video reel of all of the highlights from their state board meetings, their committee meetings, task force, sometimes, what they're doing in the community. It's a really cool thing. And then finally, there's social media campaigns. And I'm featuring one right here. The Washington State Board of Ed is in the midst of kind of a social campaign to share about the board's work. It's, they're highlighting certain members, they're highlighting certain initiatives, all of that. And I think it's a really, really kind of a fun, effective way to kind of lift the veil on, what the state board does, which sometimes is a really hard thing to explain. So if you want to see it, I'll play it now. It's just a minute, so. So there you have it. Oops. Let's get to the next one. So there you have it. The next one, events. State boards are natural conveners. So it's an easy way to keep stakeholders and constituencies informed about the board's work. So site visit to a school, convening roundtables, hosting webinars or speaking at conferences. This is an example of the DC State Board of Ed hosted a series of roundtables and breakout sessions to discuss their social studies standards and their school accountability work and also board governance. So it was a good way for state board members to present the work of the board, but also hear feedback from the community as well. Along the same vein, collaboration. So working groups, task forces, committee work. This is an example of the Maryland State Board working in conjunction with the Maryland State Board or State Education Department They hosted a series of virtual roundtables with various stakeholder groups. This one happens to be a local school board, but this was to inform its strategic planning process. And so this is just another way to get into the community. Similarly, Illinois partnered with a group called Teach Plus to host statewide affinity groups around educator diversity issues and retention and policies that would kind of move the needle on that as well. And finally, public recognition. It's important to recognize the efforts of stakeholders and to celebrate them. It's also important for the board sometimes to reaffirm its commitments. So this is an example from North Carolina. They passed a resolution on and kind of reaffirm their commitment to equity and excellence and its ties to their strategic plan. This was, I think, in 2020, around the time of the George Floyd killing and kind of where everything was heightened around focus of racial issues. So that is kind of putting that stake in the ground. The other example is from DC, and this is just a simple resolution that is celebrating the work of a principal and the efforts and his efforts. And so I think that, public recognition like this, especially for educators, I think is really important right now. It can go a long way for boosting morale, for example, and celebrating wins that the board has had. It kind of shows that goodwill and shows that kind of the board is working for students and families and teachers and all of that. So the next couple of slides is really about kind of tips and tricks. Working with the media, you don't want to fight your battles in the media. You want to build relationships with the media. But if you have to kind of be, in touch with the media, there are some kind of useful tips that I think you can use. One of them, and always ask first, is, are you the right spokesman? Again, that's going back to your state board policies around speaking with the media and communicating on behalf of your board. Second, prepare. Get those talking points in order. Talk with your SEA person or any expert at the SEA level or your board exec to make sure that you are prepared to talk with the reporter. And keep your cool. Always take a breath. Watch for those leading questions because they will kind of hit you when you're least expecting it. This is the ATM trick is a trick that I picked up from a fellow communications professional. It's remember ATM. Answer questions in your own words, then you transfer to your message. So those talking points that you have, they should have all of your key messages on them. So that's kind of to help you stay on message. I did write a boardsmanship review on working with your media, and so I highly recommend that you take a look at that and read through it. There's a lot more tips in there as well, just not these. Next is social media. I think we all have, whether it's personal or professional, a social media presence. And I think it doesn't matter if it is a personal or professional. These are kind of tips to live by. Again, here we go. Check your board's policy on using social media. Always use good judgment when you're communicating. Be respectful, responsible about what you're posting. And stick with what you know. So, if you are not the person that's an expert on teacher shortages and you're spouting off about, statistics that aren't maybe quite accurate, then you probably shouldn't be tweeting about them because those tweets last forever. So stick with what you know, kind of stay within those parameters. You'll hear from Byron in a few. He likes to use the motto light, bright, and polite. I think that is fantastic. And remember, if you get in trouble, or even if you don't, use your board staff, use the SEA staff to help you through conflicts, or to give you advice on how to use social media, or how to get out of a pickle. They should always be your first stop. On the side here, I have written on building social media policies for state boards, and kind of some of those guardrails. This actually happens to be my We the Media column that appears in the NASBE standard, 3 times a year when it comes out. And so I cover a range of communications and engagement issues and strategies. So please look for that. It covers, it's a different thing every time. So please do check that out as well. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to ask me any questions, send me an email. I am on social media, but not really very much. So don't tweet me. but I am going to kind of wrap up here, and I want to introduce Byron Ernest, who is our immediate past chair of the board, of the NASBE board, and he is an Indiana State Board member. He is also a really great communicator. And if you're not following him on Twitter, you should. He is super, super popular. He's got like hundreds of thousands of followers, and he just uses that light, bright, and polite strategy, and I think it does him well. So definitely lots to learn from him. So Byron, are you ready?
I am. I was. Oh.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Were you turning it to me?
Yes, I was.
Okay. I was holding off. I am in the airport, actually. Some changes in plans happen, and so I'm actually in Fort Myers, Florida, in the airport, waiting to go home now. But excited to be with you all, and I appreciate the fact that Renee brought up. I love being quoted, right? The light, bright, and polite. I learned that a long time ago, and that has served well to have people then, listen to what you're saying and being able to get your point across. I think the big things for me that I wanted to stress from what Renee said, and so some of this is going to be a little bit of the teacher in me's coming out, because I want you to hear it again so that you maybe think about it from that standpoint. Is one, be strategic and have a plan. And Renee is a great resource if you ever need that. I think back most recently, just in our plan with Paolo, bringing him on as new CEO and president. That's very much a big deal to think about what the press releases, how you release those kinds of things. And so have a plan with that, and then follow the plan and make sure that everybody's involved in that plan. I know Paolo will tell you I probably drove him nuts with just continually asking him, hey, are we doing this the way we said we were going to? Are we good with these dates? Are we good? But that's very, very important when we're doing communication. And I think that's something to think about. And the other thing I would say is, and I like I said, I've just got a few notes here, and then when we'll turn it back and can be a discussion, but I try to stay out of opinionated posts. I don't give my opinion. One, I'm a policymaker, so everybody will know my opinion when I vote. And I particularly, from a NASBE standpoint, we're a bipartisan organization, so I like to hear about all sides of things. So I may go to a conference on something that I maybe don't agree with, but I want to understand it as well, right? And have those learning conversations about that. And then the other thing that I wanted to add, and this is something that I think that NASBE does a good job of that Renee didn't talk about, is to always think about whether information ought to be pushed or information ought to be pulled. So let me give you an example of this. You can go to the NASBE website and get most everything you need to know and get registered for things. But if you're like me, I'm not going to the website. So I'm waiting on the email that comes out of, hey, don't forget to get on for registered for the September office hours, right? And always glad there's the second one, because I don't ever on the first one, because I'm just not thinking about it at that point, right? So I give that as an example when you're doing, whether it be social media, whether it be other types of communications, remember to think about pushed versus pulled, because most people now get overloaded with things, and it's good to be able to push those important things to people to be able to have. So sorry about the airport announcement. I'm going to keep talking though. Also, make the other thing that Renee said that's very true is make sure you're allowed to report something as well. So not even related to your board policy, but Abby on here, she knows that I will tweet about everything. So I like it when they say, hey, this is not able to be tweeted about yet, or this can't go on social media yet because it hasn't been vetted, or you're seeing it for the first time. Make sure you know those kinds of things as well, particularly if you're going to be on social media. I think that's really, really important to think about. And then lastly, the thing that I would say, and Renee did touch on this, but it's another one of my little sayings that I have, and I say this about social media, I say this about when I'm in a meeting. A lot of times I will say things like, gosh, it's been said, everything's been said, but just not by everybody yet. And you know who those people are in meetings who have to make a comment about every single thing, right? But I would say this about social media and the media as well. Does it need to be, here's my 3 questions with this. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And then, am I the right person to be saying it? Or does it need to be said by me? And so that's what I leave you with. Light, bright, and polite. And does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by me? So Renee, I'll turn it back to you.
I'm going to steal that for next year, Byron, for sure.
Well, as long as you quote me, because I love being quoted.
I always do. I always give credit. But I think that, that's a really important point too. What I said earlier about those internal communication strategies. Talks, you are one of many board members, and you have to think about who is the best spokesperson, who are the best messengers. Is it someone on the SEA staff? Is it someone on the board? Is it someone within the community? And so having kind of being aligned in those internal communications efforts will then help and help you be more effective at those extra. So I think that asking those questions, in your board setting with your fellow board members, I think is an important step that you can take as well. Are there any questions? I want to leave time, for a few minutes before we wrap up. If you have any questions for either Byron or myself.
Go ahead, Woody.
Byron, I think if I started to tweet, I would get my knuckles wrapped with a ruler. How do you get away with tweeting? Do you have to get the approval of your board or whatever?
No, for us, we do not have that as a policy. We can be on social media, and again, Woody, in my case, there might be times that somebody might have issues, but I'm not going to put things out there that are in a controversial manner. I'm going to put it out in an educational manner of, hey, here's what's happening, or hey, you might want to know about this, or a celebration, or that kind of thing. There's ways to put controversial things out there without having to put your slant on it. It's why I was laughing at Renee's slide. I don't know when I watched the news the last time. It's been years, and I'm glad. I didn't even know they had newspapers anymore. I just don't. In fact, I kind of live by that. The news will come to me if it needs to, and I do use social media for that. But Woody, I think in our case, we don't have a policy about that, so there would be no knuckle rapping. But again, if you're using that philosophy of light, bright, and polite, I don't know that anybody'd have an issue with that.
Okay, well, second, what's the secret of your popularity?
Regular tweets and good content.
Okay.
Woody, it's also good to talk to your board exec and connect with your department's communications staff, because sometimes that, your voice may be helpful to them. And so just having a conversation, especially if you want to do some tweeting, talk ahead of time about it. The other thing to be careful about is that, there were some lawsuits maybe 4 or 5 years ago about using a Twitter account in your official capacity versus one in your personal capacity. If you're tweeting in your official capacity, then those are all a public record, and also B, you can't really shut people off of those, because that was the nature of the lawsuit, whether you could block people from following you. And it was decided that if you're tweeting in your official capacity, that's a public forum in some respects. So some people, in fact, have 2 Twitter accounts, one for their personal, and then one when they're speaking as an elected official, or what have you. So it's also important to be careful about those kind of situations.
And using disclaimers too. So if it is a hybrid account or something like that, being, divulging that their personal views, not the views of the state board or SEA or whatever have you. It's important to kind of, lay that out there, any conflicts of interest and all of that as well.
Other questions, or some of you may have already had your own experiences with the media. And, and I've known board members that run the whole spectrum, those who would prefer never to interact with, a reporter or somebody, to those who, seek them out and are very, very active in talking to the media. And, all those are fine, as long as, again, you follow some helpful rules. There's, chief among those is sort of the no surprises rule, especially when it comes to finding yourself in a place that may be different, or it's misinterpreted that you're speaking on behalf of the board when you're not, or you're saying something that's different from where the department might be, and haven't given them notice. That doesn't mean you can't have your own opinions. It's just trying to make sure that you are attentive to letting people, making sure people are aware and not catching people by surprise. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great week. And we'll look to see you at annual conference, if not sooner.